Welcome back to Domains to Dollars, where today we'll cover how to deploy your AI-generated landing pages onto AWS for dirt cheap. We'll go ahead and jump right into it. So, in the very first video, we went over how to use AI in N8N to generate a config file that builds out your entire landing page for you. In the second video, we went over how to use the config file with the power of React to generate a static site that then can be deployed within AWS for a very low cost, allowing you to deploy landing pages at scale across many domains that you own. So in this video, we'll go ahead and we'll get into the nitty-gritty details of how to actually deploy this on AWS, all for less than $1 a month. So let's go ahead and hop into it, and we'll talk about all the components involved and how you can do it for yourself in no time. So just as a quick preview, this is what the end site looks like for my staffing page. This will be something that will evolve over time, but as a first pass, I'm pretty happy with how it looks to start. As a quick aside, I want to go over who I am and what I do. So I'm Hunter Sneed, the creator of Getting Automated. Getting Automated is focused on providing educational content to small and medium-sized business owners, automators, and entrepreneurs alike to really kind of introduce the power of automation to existing business processes and procedures to not only drive efficiency, but also increase revenue. Additionally, I run an automation consulting company called Workflowsy that goes and actually provides those automation services for those who don't want to go ahead and build it out themselves. Enough of that, let's go ahead and talk about how this all works. In the very first video, I confess to being a domain hoarder. I've amassed over 30 domains just with the prefix of automation for X that I really wanted to stand up landing pages for. That said, when I went to go and actually look at the services available to stand up landing pages, they were all prohibitively expensive for sites that I wasn't even sure would materialize into something. So I went ahead and built out my own approach to building out landing pages quickly and hosting them on AWS, all for less than $1 a month per landing page. And so today I want to go over how to actually deploy those now that we've actually built out the site and want to actually then stand it up on AWS. All right, so one of the challenges when it comes to actually deploying a website is when people hear AWS, they think of a big price tag and complexity associated with actually doing anything with AWS, because in a lot of cases, it is aimed at enterprise customers. That said, that doesn't have to be the case. There are ways in which you can use AWS, GCP, Azure, really any of these large cloud providers to go ahead and host your website and different services in a really cost-effective way, and that's something we're going to go ahead and cover today. Really what we're trying to do is we want to have end-to-end automation. I want to make this as simple as possible for you to go ahead and provide some minimal configuration after you've already built out your React site with your application, and then have it go and actually deploy the entire thing for you without you having to be some sort of a master or wizard within AWS. So I set a couple main objectives for this video and for this deployment process as a whole. One of them being I wanted this to be end-to-end automated. I wanted it to be really, really easy for you to go ahead and just provide minimal information and have it stood up and deployed for you. Additionally, I wanted these sites to load really fast. A lot of times page speed is a big indicator in whether or not your page ranks within Google, and so having fast load times is really important for that. Cost effectiveness is something I've really harped on the whole time, and that's something that, again, for less than $1 a page or $1 a website per month, you can go ahead and host your landing page on AWS, and then security and scalability. Whether you're going to get 100 views to your website or 100,000 views to your website in a month, I want to go ahead and make sure that we are properly accounting for that and that your website scales regardless of the amount of traffic that you get. Here's how it all works. We'll go through all these at a high level. If there's anything that's unclear, all of these are pretty well documented online, and you're welcome to go ahead and look up kind of the individual components at a more granular level that fits your need. But at the highest level, basically what's going to happen is a user is going to have a web browser and they're going to navigate to your domain name. Your domain name, when you go and type in automationforstaffing.com, basically what happens is there's what's called a DNS lookup. So it goes ahead and it takes that domain name, again, automationforstaffing.com, and it converts it to an IP address. And that IP address is where your actual website is hosted. So in this case, it's going to give an IP address within AWS, so that way your computer knows to go and ask for the files from AWS for that actual website. So again, user browser to domain name to DNS, which in AWS's case is a service called Route 53, and then it hits what's called CloudFront. And CloudFront is basically what's called a CDN. It's a content delivery network. And so the intent of it is when you go ahead and load a web page, depending on where that server is located, say you're in Chicago, but the server is located somewhere in Europe, that's going to go ahead and take a lot longer to actually return that response because your request has to go over the internet all the way to the server in Europe, get the response back, and then have it returned all the way back to you. So a content delivery network is this concept of, hey, let's go ahead and have a bunch of servers all over the world, and let's go ahead and when a user makes a request, let's route their request to the closest server so that way they get the fastest possible response time for the requests that they're making. And so a CDN is really important for making sure that you're having quick and speedy page times for the actual requests that are being made. And then really kind of what's behind the CDN is there's two main components. There's a certificate. So anytime you go onto a website and you see HTTPS, there's a certificate associated with that website. And what that means is that your traffic is encrypted and your communication with that website is encrypted. So if you enter any sort of information into a form, any sort of information into maybe a payments, checkout, anything like that, all of that information is going to be encrypted and cannot be intercepted by anyone that's trying to maliciously steal your information as you're interacting on that site. And then we have an S3 bucket, and that's basically where we're taking all the files that our React page builds when we do a build process, and it goes ahead and it puts it in the S3 bucket, and that's where our files for our website lives. And so if we start at the top where the user web browser is, again, we make the request to automationforstaffing.com. It looks up the IP address of that via DNS. It then sends it to CloudFront, which sends the request to the closest server that has our files on it. And then from there, it says, hey, let me give you a certificate back with your request. So that way it is a secure HTTPS request. And let me go ahead and give you the files back. And that's, again, what lives in the S3 bucket. And so all of this gets packaged back up and sent back to the CloudFront. And then CloudFront goes ahead and passes that response back to your web browser. And while I'm kind of oversimplifying at the highest level, this is what's happening for just about any web request. Now, the services specified here are specific to AWS, but CDNs as a whole are pretty popular. Again, certificates are something that you come across on just about any website that you browse today. And any sort of static website hosting, such as S3 or any other kind of static website provider, these are all common constructs within the internet that are pretty common for how kind of modern websites are hosted, especially if they're statically generated websites. So I won't go into this too much further, but I did want to kind of give analogies for each of these to make them a little bit easier for you to understand. We went over the core components at a high level, but again, let's think about S3 as kind of your storage locker for your website. It's where all your files, your styling, your scripts, everything for your website goes, and it's what makes it accessible for people to be able to access. Again, CloudFront is really kind of the finding the closest server to you and making sure that the content is being served in a quick respondent way to your actual request. So that way it's not something where, depending on where the user is located, it has to go all over the world to go and get that file and return it back. The SSL is kind of your kind of digital ID. It's saying, hey, this is who I am. And there is a certificate authority that goes and validates that, yes, this person is who they say they are. And the certificate is the way to actually validate that. And then DNS, I think a phone book analogy is a really good way to look at it. It's saying, hey, I have this address. Who lives here? Or, hey, in this case, I have this domain. What is the IP address? And so those were kind of the key components that played here. And I know we went over them in the previous slide, but I figure some of these analogies might help make it stick just a little bit more. Okay, so I said I wanted to make this dead simple for you to deploy. And so what we have is we have a deployment script that I built out. And the deployment script requires you to enter in a couple minimal configuration parameters. And with those, it goes and does all the heavy lifting of creating those different AWS components so you don't have to. And then anytime you make a change to your actual React site, you can go ahead and rerun the script, and it'll go ahead and publish the newest version of your site to the existing infrastructure that you've built out within AWS. So that way it's really easy to go ahead and iterate real time with any changes you have to make to your landing page. The actual configuration file that I built out is called deploy-config.env. And you'll find it on the GitHub page in a deployment folder that has all the scripts and tools and everything else that you'll need to be able to easily deploy your website onto AWS. In just a second, I'll go over the variables that are in the deploy-config, but this is really kind of the configuration file that should make it pretty straightforward for you to go ahead and dictate what you want and what you expect your website to be, and then for it to actually go and be realized within AWS. So this right here is an example of what the config is. I actually took my config for automation for staffing and plugged it in right here. And so you specify a region within AWS. AWS has what are called regions. Basically think of them as kind of geographical data centers. And so US East 1 is the most common region within AWS and is typically what people are going to deploy to, especially if it's closest to them. But there are other US regions as well. There's US East 1, East 2, West 1, and West 2. You can go ahead and look up their locations and see what's closest to you and the users that will actually be accessing your content. And then from there, you can go ahead and deploy or change this to a different region if it suits you. Beyond that, we're going to go ahead and create what's called an AWS CLI profile. Basically what that is that's what authenticates us to AWS to be able to go ahead and deploy stuff to it and set up the infrastructure that we need to. And then additionally, what we've got is we're setting the domain configuration. So that's setting a domain name. That should be pretty straightforward. Whatever domain name that you bought that you want to set the landing page up on, you would go ahead and specify this here. And then the last thing is around DNS. So you can go ahead and depending on where you bought your domain, whether that's Cloudflare, whether that's GoDaddy, whether that's Namecheap, any of those, you can go ahead and use the DNS that they provide and just point it at AWS, or you can use AWS's built-in DNS service called AWS Route 53 as an option as well. That would allow you to then go and actually have AWS handle all the DNS changes for you. Either is totally fine. The script accounts for either. So we'll go ahead and outline kind of what both look like, and you can figure out what makes the most sense for you. Okay, so the script we'll go over in just a second, but it's about 1,000 lines of code long. And so I wanted to kind of give you at a high level what this all looks like and what's actually happening within the script. So that way you understand at a high level kind of the different pieces that are coming together and kind of how this all gets laid out. And so the first thing that happens is your config file that you filled out that we just went over is basically validated. And so it goes ahead and makes sure, hey, is the domain in the proper format? Are you specifying the region? Are you specifying whether you're doing manual or Route 53 DNS? Kind of all the things that the script actually needs to be able to perform its job. It goes ahead and it does that as a kind of script initialization and validation. The CLI check goes and actually checks and sees if you have the AWS CLI installed. If you don't, it gives you instructions on how to actually go and install that. It's super, super easy. Then from there, it goes and checks if the resources that you'd like to deploy to actually exist. So what does that actually mean? So in this case, if you've already went ahead and deployed previously, it's going to check, hey, does this S3 bucket exist? Do I already have a certificate? Am I already using CloudFront as a CDN? If you're already using any of those things or those already exist based on your configuration file, it's going to go ahead and skip creating those again and just use those existing resources within AWS. If none of those exist within AWS, it will go ahead and create each of those for you. So that way you don't have to worry about actually having to go and create any of the infrastructure within AWS. Then from there, we'll actually go and build your React app. So it'll go and actually perform a build where that outputs what's called your static website with all of your static files. And those files are then used to actually go ahead and display your website. And that's what actually gets uploaded to AWS to S3 to again, then be accessible on your actual domain. So in my case, it'd be automationforstaffing.com. From there, your CloudFront distribution, again, this is your CDN, your content delivery network is set up. That's what goes ahead and makes it accessible online at your actual domain name. So again, automationforstaffing.com. We create the certificate after that. The certificate is what makes sure that we have secure communication between the end user and the actual website. Again, so that way none of the traffic can be intercepted or can be maliciously used. And then the DNS configuration, this can really happen at any point in time. But for the intents of this, we'll go ahead and show the DNS configuration happening here. And that's basically saying, hey, this is where to find my website. And so again, whether you're setting that up within Route 53 or you're setting that up within your own kind of domain provider. Again, GoDaddy, Namecheap, Network Solutions, any of them, doesn't matter, wherever you bought your domain. That would be set up there. And then the actual deployment summary. So once it's all deployed, it'll give you a summary of, hey, this is the deployment. These are the things that were stood up for you. This is all the information that you need. Really, it just kind of gives you a summary of what was actually performed on your behalf and tells you that your site is live and that you can go ahead and access it. And so again, we'll demonstrate all of this in just a little bit, but I want to make sure that you understand all the different components that go into this and how it applies to you. I won't spend long here, but one of the questions that I anticipate getting is, should I use my own DNS or should I use Route 53? And the answer is really up to you. Route 53 is great if you don't already have anything set up on your existing domain. So when I say set up, I mean if you don't already have email set up on your domain. So if you didn't have something like Hunter at Automation for Staffing set up or any existing records, then Route 53 is great. It makes it really easy for AWS to manage your DNS and not really have to do anything with it. That said, if you do already have custom DNS records, such as CNAMEs or anything else like that, set up on your domain, manual may be the better way to go, as you don't have to go ahead and worry about moving those DNS records over to Route 53 in the process of having that be your new DNS provider. DNS does cost 50 cents a month, so it is a little bit more of overhead in the overall process. Again, it's a phenomenal service, but only if it makes sense for you and what you're trying to do. All right, so I kept my word of saying, hey, we can deploy a site on AWS for less than $1 a month. And so if you don't use Route 53, again, which is a 50-cent charge, then you're looking at roughly around 60 cents per month for your site. And that 60 cents includes up to 10,000 requests to your site, assuming that you don't have a bunch of pictures or videos or anything else like that you'd be serving from your site. And so this is unbelievably economical in terms of deploying sites at scale and not having to worry about the ongoing cost of keeping that site online. Even with Route 53, it's anticipated to be $1.10 a month. So at that cost, we're still right around that $30 price point for 30 domains that we had talked about originally when starting this whole series off. And so again, really kind of a cost-effective way, which is not something that people typically think of when they think of AWS and kind of cloud service providers as a whole. All right, so let's go ahead and hop into the demo, and I'll show you how this all works and how you can do it for yourself. So let me go ahead and I will pull up not only the GitHub page, but also the repo and walk you through all of this. All right, so on my screen, I have the GitHub repository, and let me go ahead and zoom in so that way you can actually see it. So I've added a folder here from the last time that you may have checked this called deployment. And within this, I have a couple different files here. I've got a README that goes ahead and actually describes what's all happening here. So it talks about the two different versions of the script, one for my Mac and Linux users, and then one for Windows users as well. And so it talks about how to actually run it, whether you're a Windows user or a Mac user. It also talks about the logical flow of what's actually happening within the scripts and all the different checks that are happening. And it also breaks down at a high level kind of what the logical AWS flow and architecture is. All of this gets a little technical. It's not something that you have to review unless you want to. I'm just a nerd and I wanted to put this together. So for the people that wanted to get nitty gritty about this, they had the information to go ahead and really dive into it and how it's all working. Then from there, it outlines the configuration file and what to expect. Again, we'll go ahead and specify how that all works, as well as how to actually go ahead and do the deployment, any features and functionality that comes with this as well. So one of the precursors to being able to set this up on AWS is for you to actually go and create an AWS account. So I won't go ahead and show you how to actually sign up for the account. That part is pretty straightforward, but what I will show you is how to go ahead and create the actual IAM user to go ahead and actually then deploy this as you would expect to within AWS. So once you've created your AWS account, you should be greeted by a screen that looks like this. So let me go ahead and show you a couple small steps that enables you to actually go ahead and create a user that can deploy to AWS. So what you're going to want to do, and again, I'll zoom in here, is go up to the top and search IAM. So IAM is Identity and Access Management. It's really kind of the core security service in terms of creating users and defining the privileges that they have within your AWS account. And so once you're in IAM, go ahead and click on users. You can do so here, or you can do so to the left. But when you do so, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go ahead and create a new user. I've went ahead and already created some, but I'll go ahead and create one with you right now, so that way you understand what all needs to be done. So in this, you can name it whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. I'll go ahead and say test, React, deployment, user. Great. This box right here around provide user access to AWS Management Console, you do not need to click that. I recommend that you don't. And then we'll go ahead and click next. And we'll go ahead and attach a policy directly. So we'll go ahead and we'll attach the AWS Administrator Access Policy. I want you to note that this is the most privileged policy within AWS, and so you need to be careful about protecting your API keys when creating an IAM user for deployment. It's not a bad idea as well to go ahead and disable or delete the actual user that you create with this policy once you're done using it, or if you don't see yourself deploying for a while, as having that user open with this policy attached is a potential security risk in the future. So again, we'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and attach the administrator access policy, and then we'll scroll down and click on next. Once we do that, we'll go ahead and click on create user. And once we've created the user, we'll go ahead and we will click on that user, and we're going to go ahead and create our API key to go ahead and actually let us, again, connect to AWS from our script. So we click on security credentials, and then down here, what we'll do is click on create access key. And what you want to do is you can go ahead and click other here, and then click next. And then we'll go ahead and give an actual description of the key that we're creating. So React deployment key. Great. And then they give you the option to go ahead and download the access key or go ahead and just copy it out. I typically tend to download it. You will not be able to come back to this screen after the fact. So please make sure that whatever you do, that you're actually saving it on your computer or saving it in Notepad or something like that, so that way you don't lose the secret access key. So we've went ahead and we've created the actual AWS API key. Now let's go ahead and set it up on your actual computer. So if you haven't already, what you're going to want to do is go ahead and download AWS CLI. And so AWS CLI is available for all major distributions, whether that's Windows, Mac, or Linux. And so there's an installer for all of these that makes it really easy to go ahead and set it up on your computer. You'll go ahead and you'll install it. And then what you'll do is you'll go ahead and open up either a command prompt, PowerShell, or terminal window, depending on the OS you're using. In my case, I'll go ahead and I'll use iTerm. So within this, it makes it really easy to go ahead and actually set up that user. So what you want to do, and let me just zoom in. So again, you can see it, is you're in command prompt, and I promise you it's not as scary as it looks. And so what you'll do here is you'll type in AWS configure. And so what it's going to do is it's going to ask you to go ahead and pass in your API keys. So let me go ahead and I will actually go and open that file. Give me just 1 second. And great. Okay, it is opening up. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in the access key, and then I'll paste in the secret key in the region, and it'll go ahead and create this for me. So within this, as it opens, okay, great. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in the access key. There it is. I'm going to paste in the secret key. Great. And then the region, you can go ahead and just click enter. And the default output format, you don't need to do anything with this as well. Okay, great. So you've went ahead and you've created your AWS access key on your computer. So let's go ahead and flip over to our IDE. In my case, that would be Cursor. And we can go ahead and actually show you how to run this script using the credentials that you just created. All right, so here we are in Cursor. And what we've got here is I've got the README for the deployment directory pulled up that goes ahead and it outlines all the details about the actual README script or the deployment script and kind of how it all works and how to run it, whether you're running Windows or Mac or Linux, and kind of what this all looks like. And so what we want to do is we want to go and find the deploy-config.env file. And so there's going to be pretty minimal things that we actually have to fill out here. We'll have to set our region, which in this case, we'll go ahead and use US East 1. We'll have to set our AWS CLI profile. In my case, or your case, because you use the AWS configure, the AWS CLI profile name will be default. So we can go ahead and do that. You will then go ahead and set your domain name. In my case, again, automation for staffing, and then the DNS method. So I went ahead and used manual. I'm hosting my actual DNS on Cloudflare and then pointing it at AWS. Again, everyone's DNS is going to be a little bit different. But I have instructions on how to actually set up your DNS as part of the script if it's not working for you or if you can't figure it out. Okay, so we've got our deploy config all figured out here. And what we can do now is, again, depending on whether you're using Windows or Mac, you're going to go ahead and run whether it's the PowerShell script for Windows or the shell script for Mac. And so let me show you what that actually looks like. So in your command line, make sure that you are in the deployment directory. So as you can see here, I'm in landing page generator /deployment. So I am in the right directory. I'll go ahead and ls, which shows me all the files in my directory. And you can see that I can see this deploy.sh. So I will go ahead and do a period /deploy.sh. And when I go ahead and run this, what it's going to do is it's going to check for existing AWS resources to go ahead and stand up my automation for staffing site. And so I already have all the content in here that you would expect me to, with the config file as well as the contact form components and kind of all the components in here. I did actually add a couple components and tweak this slightly based on my own needs for this specific landing page. I know I just said I already have all the components that you'd expect, such as contact form, but I actually created contact form for my specific use case. And I also added some things around SEO and other structured data to go ahead and kind of have the site be even better than the initial template that I built. You'll have to go ahead and update your config file that comes out of N8N to accommodate that. You can go ahead and take a look at my config file that I went ahead and updated for this specific site if you want to see the changes I've made and how you could apply them to your own site as well. So, as I was saying, we go ahead and we type in period /deploy.sh and we hit enter. And what this does is it goes ahead and it will start to actually go and check for the resources within AWS that it expects to see. So since I've already run this before, it says, hey, the S3 bucket for automationforstaffing.com already exists. And so then it goes ahead and verifies that the bucket is in the right configuration, meaning that it can actually host my website. And then what it does is it actually goes and does an NPM or a React build where it's building out my React app. Really what that means is it's just going and creating a static version of my website. And so you can see all the different files here that are being created, and it's uploading it to S3. Again, that's where all the files for the website reside. And then from there, what it's doing is it's checking, do I have a valid SSL certificate? If I do, which in my case I do because I've run this previously, it goes ahead and it pulls in that certificate. And then it checks for CloudFront, which is again your CDN. And it says, hey, do you have a CloudFront distribution already? In my case, I do. But every time you make an update to your site, what you need to do is you need to invalidate that old distribution, which has your old version of your site, and create a new distribution. And so this goes ahead and handles that for me as well. And so you can see that it's went ahead and it invalidated my old distribution. And then what it'll do is create the new distribution. And then what it's also doing is it's checking to see if my DNS is set up. In my case, this is not something that resolves as you would expect it to, as I'm setting up DNS in kind of a weird way. So disregard the checks that are happening here. But basically what it's doing is it's saying, hey, you've got a manual DNS configuration specified, which I do in my actual config file. And then in here, if we look here a little bit more, and again, I'll zoom in even more, what it does is it specifies what to actually do with your DNS. So if you're hosting your domain and your DNS on a kind of domain provider, again, such as GoDaddy Network Solutions, Cloudflare, any of them really, what you can do is you're going to want to go ahead and set an A record up to point to this CloudFront record. And so if you've ever updated DNS records, you know it's pretty straightforward. Again, it'll ask you what record type you want. It'll ask you to set the name or the host, and then from there, it'll ask you to set a value. And so you go ahead and you do that, and then it'll give you a couple more instructions as well for if you can't actually set an alias, what to actually do, and kind of how to actually set this all up. And so again, pretty straightforward. This is something that your hosting provider can typically help you with as well if you get stuck on this. But if you have questions as well, feel free to leave them in the actual video notes. And so we go ahead and we scroll down, and it says, go ahead and update your DNS if you haven't already, yada, yada, yada. And then we get this wonderful message here saying deployment process completed. And then it gives us a little summary of this is the bucket, this is the distribution, this is the domain, and this is the SSL certificate. And then it goes ahead and does a little bit of cleanup for the actual deployment process. And next thing you know, we can go ahead and we can flip back. And if we go back and we pull up the page, we can go to automation for staffing, and we've got our landing page up. And so as you can see here, I've got my hero section with the actual subtitle. I've got a contact form. I swapped it out for Tally because Tally was impacting my load speeds. So I went ahead and built out a custom contact form. I've got kind of the automation speaks, where I talk about how it speaks for itself, and a little image in here that I swapped out, again, specific to this actual kind of workflow and this specific use case. And then I made some changes as well around kind of how it works to add these different boxes to give it a little bit more of a customized feel that I thought looked a little bit better than the initial design. I've got my FAQs, and then I've got a call to action at the bottom as well. And if you click on this, what it lets you do is it actually lets you go to a contact page, and you can also book time with me via Calendly, where you can go ahead and set up time to discuss this further as you'd like to. So it's all here. This takes you back to the home page, but this is a deployed version again on automationforstaffing.com. And if we click on this, we can see that we do actually have a certificate here, and the connection is secure. So the AWS Certificate Manager is working as expected. One of the best parts about how this all works is you can go ahead and you can actually make changes to your site and redeploy the site just by running that script all over again. So if I go ahead and I change this to automation for staffing 123, and I save it, what I can do is I can go ahead and run this deploy.sh again. It's going to go ahead and run through the deployment process. Again, it's usually pretty quick. And in, I would say, probably less than a minute, what I can go ahead and do is check my site, and I should be able to see that automation for staffing 123 in the header. So I can see that my new deployment actually went through, and I can go ahead and iterate live. This is something, again, that makes it easy to iterate for, and depending on how many different landing pages you'd like to deploy, again, makes it really easy to go ahead and create different configs for different landing pages and go ahead and stand those all up. So you can see that it's already done. If I go ahead and I flip back and I refresh, I've got automation for staffing 123. And so it makes it really easy to make those changes. And again, there's nothing to it. You can go ahead and deploy as many times as you want to. It doesn't actually set up any of the new AWS infrastructure. It just uses what you already have. So that way it's not a kind of long drawn out process and makes it pretty straightforward. Also, nice try to any of you that want to go ahead and steal my API keys. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete those right now. So that way you can't actually go ahead and do that. I want to make sure that no one can go ahead and access my AWS account. So I went ahead and deleted those keys. You can do so for yourself once you're done actually standing up the site, or just make sure that you store them in a secure way. Make sure you don't commit them to the repo that your actual code is with. And that way you can go ahead and ensure that your AWS account stays secure. Okay, so we went ahead and we talked about how you can use the automated deployment scripts to actually go ahead and run the deployment process. And whether you've used AWS all your life or you've never used AWS, it makes it really easy as long as you fill out that deploy.env file or deploy-config.env file that actually goes and does the heavy lifting for you. With that, you can see your access, or you can see your site online right away by going to that URL as long as the DNS is set up. And anytime you make changes, it's really easy to go ahead and publish that new change and again, see it in real time. And then celebration time, once you've got, whether it's one landing page up or 100 landing pages up, I think each one personally deserves a little bit of a celebration. You can go ahead and do that kind of along the way and make sure that you have peace of mind that you not only have a great looking landing page up, but one that's really cost effective and performant for what you actually need. As with anything in technology, there are things that can go wrong. So if you need to troubleshoot it, there's some common kind of troubleshooting steps here around making sure that you have AWS CLI installed, making sure that you can actually execute the file. There's something called chomod. If you can't actually go ahead and run the file, look up chomod and you can go ahead and see how to actually make that file executable. That should be taken care of for you based on how I went ahead and set this up. But if that doesn't work, go ahead and kind of look it up. Or if you have any questions about how to actually run this, or it's not running for you as you would expect to, go ahead and leave a comment or go ahead and open a GitHub issue. And I'll go ahead and see what I can do to support this to some extent, to go ahead and fix any bugs. I'm sure that there's things that could be done slightly better. And I'm always looking to feedback for how I can actually improve this process and kind of make this as seamless as possible for you all that want to go ahead and try this yourself. It's been about 2 weeks since I went ahead and put out the initial domains to dollars landing page AI generated video. And what's been really cool is to see you all go and actually fork and modify the repo accordingly for your own use cases. And so with this is intended to be a starting point. If you don't like how the landing page looks, you want to make kind of additions to it, whether that be new sections, you want to change the existing sections, go ahead, be my guest. But really what this is intended to do is kind of serve as a starting point or an initial framework that you can go ahead and build further upon based on your specific needs. But it's supposed to kind of accelerate you and kind of give you that vision out of the gate for how you can see this through end to end with, again, using AI to actually generate the content at first, making the slight changes, and then going to actually be able to deploy it in a cost-effective way within AWS. So here's why I think this rocks. There's a couple things. A, it's really easy to set up. It's super automated. It's cost-effective. It's performant. I've already been over this. I won't beat a dead horse here. But I think this is a fantastic solution for domain portfolios that are much larger than just 30. Whether it's 10 domains or 1,000 domains, there's so much that you can do with an approach like this that actually allows you, again, to rapidly iterate on the actual configuration and content, and then go and stand these up in a rapid way, again, on AWS for dirt cheap, again, less than $1 a month. As a quick reminder, I will link the GitHub repo. It's going to go ahead and have everything in there. It's the same repo that I've referenced before. There's a couple different branches in there for those who are familiar with what that means. I have the initial branch that has the deployment scripts in there. And then I also have a feature branch where I have the stuff from my staffing site specifically, but I have the modifications that I made for my staffing site in there. So if you want to go ahead and take a look at what changed and use some of those modifications for yourself, you are more than welcome to. All right, so that should conclude the Domains to Dollars series. I hope that this gave you an idea of how you can leverage a couple different automation tools, again, starting with something like N8N, as well as generative AI. In our case, we used Claude, but you could use OpenAI, Llama, really any of them, to go ahead and generate content, and then how to actually use that content to rapidly create you a website that you can put up onto the internet in a really cost-effective way. And so if this was helpful for you, it really means the world to me if you could like and share this video, as well as subscribe. And what I'll go ahead is I'll be covering more automation-related series and kind of concepts and use cases that will be similar to this. So if you like what you're seeing here, again, definitely make sure to subscribe and stick around. And we'll be putting out a lot more content around this, as well as guides on our website and YouTube channel that you can check out for your own enjoyment and education. Lastly, please do not hesitate to get in touch. You can reach me a couple different ways. You can go ahead and reach me at hunter@gettingautomated.com, as well as by going to gettingautomated.com. Shortly, I will be sending out a newsletter. You may have even received a newsletter about this video and the launch of the actual newsletter. But again, I will always be accessible as well on YouTube, and expect to see a lot more content coming over the next couple weeks, months, probably even years. So again, hopefully this helps kind of give you an idea of how you can use automation to create landing pages in a rapid way and stand them up on the internet, then to go ahead and drive revenue to your actual business. If you have any questions, want to work together, or just want to talk, go ahead and set up time for me. If you have any questions, want to work together, or just want to talk, go ahead and set up time with me or reach out directly. I'd love to go ahead and understand what you all are trying to solve and how I can help you best going forward. Thank you so much, and have a great time automating.